Hello, everyone. Um, so yeah, I'm Dylan Edwards. I'm a cartoonist, obviously, and I have been making comics on a regular basis since around 2000. That's when I started Politically Incorrect, and I have um, a lot of my professional work has been mostly actually in magazines and newspapers, usually in queer press of some kind. And so I just have like a stack of books here that I can kind of flip through really quickly to give an impression of um, what all I've got, except that I forgot one of the most important ones, which is somewhere over here. Oh, yeah. So this is, of the published books, this is probably the one that people know me best for, which is Transposes, which is a nonfiction kind of anthology of single creator anthology of several queer identified trans men that I interviewed and then turned the interviews into comics. And this was published by Northwest Press in 2012. The physical book is out of print, but the digital version is still available. And then for several years, I did a comic called The Outfield for outsports.com, which is a queer sports online magazine. And this is a book that I self-published that collected all of my comics that I did for them, which I did this up until I started working on Transposes. And then I was like, I don't have time to do this comic anymore. So that one got put away. And for a couple of years, I did an editorial cartoon for a queer newspaper out of Texas. And this is the self-published book I put together that collects all those comics. If anyone has ever tried to sell collections of editorial cartoons, you know that you cannot sell collections of editorial cartoons. Nobody actually wants to buy them. So I put this together mostly as an archival thing because queer history tends to vanish. And this was just every week me going through the news and writing a single panel comic talking about whatever issues were important to queer and trans people at that time. And so this is kind of a historical document of like 2004, 2005 of a lot of the stuff that was going on. When I was putting this book together and reminding myself of the Bush years, I was like, oh, all the Trump stuff was already there. And it was just, it got turned up in volume even more, but everything they did in the Trump years, they were doing in the Bush years. And I got to be reminded of that when I was like, oh yeah, that was comics. Then Politically Incorrect was actually the first comic that I started working on with any real vigor. Like I'd done a few one-off things, but this is the first time I really put something together to like, I'm going to sit down and write a story. And this is a kind of collection of the best of that was put out by Northwest Press in 2015, I want to say. So this has like the quality of the work varies a lot. That's like that may be the very first comic that I actually sat down and finished, and you can see the art is very different from like later art, which gets much more detailed and elaborate, and the figures get better. But that's kind of what comics is like you got to start somewhere. Your work is not going to be perfect the second that you start working on it, and the only way you get better is to make a bunch of comics. So that one I worked on for off and on for about 14 years. So the first one came out in 2000, or the first like strip comic came out in 2000, and then the last page I did was 2014. And after that, I found that I couldn't write it anymore because it got harder and harder and harder to write stories about gay Republicans that wasn't like just wanting to stab people. But like in 2000, the Republican Party was a different beast from what it is today. And while I have never been a Republican, it was much easier in 2000 to find people who were more reasonable than what the party has become. But like I was asked to do a new comic of this a couple of years ago, and I was like, I just can't get into the headspace for it. Which is another thing that happens sometimes. You work on something until it no longer inspires you, and then you put it away and work on something else. And this is my sci-fi fantasy story that I've been doing as a webcomic for, I think started it in 2015. And it's called Valley of the Silk Sky. And the point of this was to write a kind of sci-fi adventure story where the characters are all queer and trans, but the focus of the story is not identity politics or anything like that. So it's like nobody like the world that I built for them, queerness and transness are non-issues, and their problems are other things like, oh no, this monster is going to eat me, or oh no, this bandit is going to rob me and take all of my stuff, or whatever. So yeah, these are self-published volumes that I put together, but I was publishing the pages just as a webcomic, and it is not quite finished. I probably have about 50 more pages to go before the book is done. But once that's done, there will be a third book, and then that story will be complete. And I've done a couple of pieces for anthologies that are standalone stories for that. So that's the other thing that I do is right now I do a comic for Outfront Magazine, which is I live in Denver. This is local to Denver. It is a monthly magazine, and I do a little half-page comic for them every month. And they give me at the beginning of the year a list of topics. So like this issue that was last year's October issue, so that's like do something Halloween-y themed. And so I did a comic about bats. And so I've been doing that for a couple of years. And then I do a series, I do these little zines. So when I get something published in an anthology and then get the rights back, I collect those. This particular series is all about, these are all autobiographical comics about queer, asexual, and trans identity. So once I get the rights back, I'll make a little like short zine that has the stories in there. And these are a couple of the anthologies I've been in. I just grabbed a couple that I thought were particularly noteworthy. This is the Nib anthology called Be Gay Do Comics. I've done a few pieces for the Nib, and they published a couple of them, reprinted them in this book. This is a really great book, actually. This is one of my favorite anthologies I've been in. I think the quality of work across the spectrum is really, really great. But in general, the Nib has been putting out really great comics, and I'm very sad that they don't exist anymore, but you can still get this book. And there's this one, which is called We're Still Here, which is an all trans anthology. And again, this is another really excellent, well curated book with a whole bunch of different trans artists from all different walks of the trans spectrum. And this is published by Stacked Deck Press and is still available through them, I believe. And that's the bulk of what I've got to show you. I've got a couple of other little things. I don't do a whole lot of fan art, but I got obsessed with Our Flag Means Death, and I did a fan art zine for them of like all of the art pieces that I came up with relevant to the show. So I mean, I have no problem with fan art. I enjoy fan art. I just don't happen to do a whole lot of it myself, except for that show. And then I have another kind of avenue of my creative process that is called Feeping Creatures, which is very monster oriented, and it's not so much about narrative comics, although I do have one narrative comic for them. But it's like cute little all ages monsters, and this little zine is like a non-binary monster. And then I just do little other things, like this is just a zine that's just art and nothing else. Because sometimes, like, as you know, comics are very labor intensive, and it's, you know, the effort involved to even put out one single page of comics is a lot. And so the Feeping Creatures are a lot of fun for me because they're specifically not intended to be planned or carefully thought out. It's just sort of like, oftentimes it's just me drawing whatever comes into my head without even thinking about it too much. Like, I do these little postcards for my patrons every month. And that's where a lot of those illustrations come from. Like I usually do them directly in pen. I don't pencil anything or plan it out. I'll just start drawing something on the postcard, and then collect. That's where this came from, is like collections of some of the postcard art I did. So that's kind of the overview of everything. I wasn't quite sure what to put together for like sharing with people, or if I mean, I have a couple of short comics that I have cut up into panels. I could just do like a reading of some of those comics, or
Well,
if you
you were showing a very interesting selection earlier when you were doing the share function.
let's see. I had put together
Here we go.
all the stuff I was pulling up before was all the book covers. So that was all like this stuff, which I just showed you.
Mm-hmm.
The
Well,
physical
these are
version.
much clearer. We can see these much more clearly.
Yeah.
And they
Um,
because we couldn't quite see the detail. The detail's wonderful.
yeah, it's definitely much clearer. And I know like the screen, I think it reverses, or at least I see it reversed, so everything is
No, we're
backwards.
not. We're seeing it straight. I mean, at least I am. Is anybody else having a problem?
Well, it's when I like with the when I hold that up, it says "Feeping Creatures" backwards. I
Well,
don't know if
it's when you screen share, it shows exactly what your screen looks like. So we are seeing exactly what you are showing us on your own screen. And it looks very nice because now we can see the details of these covers.
some
Because
of
we couldn't
this.
before, they were just little blurs.
Yeah. It's like here's a tiny thing. I also put together a few process things because I figure cartoonists like to nerd out about process. So I could bring up some of those. One of the like some of the examples I have here. I was gonna see if I'll bring this one up. So for my comic for Outfront magazine, I put together a full size mock-up of the comic to send to the editor because I feel like that's easier for them to comprehend what kind of what the comic is going to look like. So this is an example of the mock-up that I do. So the art is very, very rough. The lettering is usually kind of just slapped on there, but it gives them the idea of what I'm doing. The thing that I'm showing you on the screen now with this kind of the characters with the arrows is showing you like the rough that I sent to the editor of like the very quick, messy, sketchy drawing. And then the second illustration is the finished line art for that. So you can see how like the concepts are there, but it's a very different, like, I don't, obviously there's not a whole lot of point in putting this much detail into something if the editor is going to be like, actually change it, get rid of that character altogether. So I do this very, very, very rough, very sketchy stuff first, and then this.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So do the editors know your style? So because the images that are the roughs, you can't really see what the finish is going to look like.
Yeah, and when I am working with a new editor, I will always show them my finished work so they know what the final piece looks like. With Outfront, because I've been working with them for a couple of years, they have a very good idea of what the finished product is going to look like. So I just send them my crappy, sketchy art, and
sure, yeah,
they understand how it's going to go. But anytime I'm breaking in a new editor, I'll be like, what I'm going to send you to edit is going to look like garbage. But here, let me show you some things that are my finished artwork, so you'll know what the final piece will look like. So yeah, I definitely try to work with them on making sure that we have an understanding of how things are going to look. This is kind of entertaining. I did a comic a couple of months ago where I was talking about one of my old D&D characters, and this is a progression of this character's design over the last 30 years. Yeah. So this is me in high school drawing this character like a high school artist, you know, like this is not, you know, this is just like I would have drawn this when I was like, I don't know, in 10th or 11th grade or something like that. And then later on came back to that character when I was in my early 20s. And you can see the big difference between drawing someone, like just drawing without reference and just kind of drawing like a kid who's learning how to draw. And then the second iteration being very obviously photo referenced. And then the third iteration being kind of a hybrid of photo reference and an original, like unreferenced drawing. So for example, like I will often do a pose that's a combination of a few different reference images. So I kind of took the arm placement from that middle one, and then the legs are from a different, like a different photo reference, and then the face is just something that I made up without using a reference at all. But that's kind of a look through at how my process has evolved and how my character design has evolved. Of like, it amused me to go back and look at how things have changed over 30 years. This one here. I'll open these up because this gives a more of an overview. So this is a comic I did last year where the comic was about Judas Priest. And so you can see I have the photo reference taped to my drafting table, and then below that are the pencils for, you know, that are built off of that photo, but you can see that I changed the positions to some degree because I had to fit them into a different space from what the original photo was, and the original photo was cropped in ways that didn't work for the comic that I was doing. So using reference, but also breaking away from that reference when necessary.
Oh.
And then the final artwork ended up looking like this. This is a digital color that I put on there. I will work either, like my drawing is either, my drawing is always like I do pencils and inks on paper. And then with the color, I've been using traditional media less and digital more. And that has a lot to do with shoulder pain and trying to vary the position that I'm in, because if I'm hunched over like this all the time, it makes everything worse and puts me in physical therapy for the 9 millionth time. So I've been kind of teaching myself more and more about digital color and how to, and also once it can be a little faster. I find the coloring process itself is not that much faster, but if I'm doing natural media for color, I have to scan the inks and then scan the colors and then try to merge the inks and the colors back together into one unified file. And that can be very, very difficult to do. They often don't match up very well. And there's a function in Photoshop that's supposed to kind of make them mesh again. And I find it works maybe 25% of the time. So with digital color, the way that it saves me time is that I don't have to marry the inks back to the colors because it's all part of the same file. And what's this one here? Oh, this is pencils to final. So this was another comic that I did for Outfront. If you've seen our League of Their Own, you will recognize these characters. But you can see also, like, I'll do the one I think maybe the reason I picked this out is because I'll do the pencils, and the pencils are just kind of like, I'm trying to get this done. I'm trying to get the figures on paper and get the comic penciled out and not belabor everything with intense perfectionism. So you can see that I changed the face quite a bit for this is what's her name?
Julia Roberts.
Yeah, Darcy, she was on The Good Place. She played the robot.
Oh,
Anyway,
Right.
it's like Darcy Arden or Darden. Anyway, but yeah, so I did the pencils up here, and I felt like that didn't really capture her face all that well, but I was just trying to get it done. And then when I went back to inks, I did quite a few changes to make that look more like her. But I do find that if I focus too much on perfectionism up front, then things just don't get done. And if I pencil everything to a point where I'm at least baseline satisfied with it, I can go back and fix that before I finalize everything. If I spend a couple of days away from it and I'm like, you know what, I don't like that face, I need to redo that face. So that's more part of that process. I did a comic that was based on, like, I was doing Richard Scarry characters as queer archetypes, because he has all those animals, and like the wolves and the foxes and the cats and all these are all queer animals. So for this, I don't usually reference other artists. I do a lot of photo reference, obviously, but this was me trying to capture Richard Scarry's style, but at the same time also make it my style, because he has a very, very thin line, and my lines are much heavier. And so I wanted it to be very obviously not something that I just cut and pasted from him. Like, it was me drawing in his character style, but as me. So these characters are like me working from references. I'm like, okay, his wolves have these little eyelash things going on there, and then the pig has this kind of little snout, and he draws the ears this way and the feet this way and whatever, but then making it into like the queer archetype of pig, and so it has pig nipple rings like you do. Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of a baseline of my process. I will do like a typed script. I don't, like I said, I usually give the editor a mock-up rather than a typed script, because a lot of the time I'm working with editors who don't actually edit comics. And so I find that oftentimes if I just hand them a script that's nothing but text, they don't know what to do with it. But if I am working with, like when I was working on Transposes, I was sending the editor just like a typed script for the whole thing, and then she would edit that, and then once that was in good enough condition, then I would go to the mock-up stage of it. But in general, I prefer to work in mock-up rather than in text script, because I know that I write too much text up front. When I'm actually trying to fit it into the panels, and then see it with the drawings that I have in mind, that's when I'm like, okay, I can cut that text, I can cut that text, I can cut that text. Because once I see it together, I can see which things don't need to be there. And that's harder for me to do when it's just text.
Oh, yeah, sorry, stupid question. Are you talking dialogue there, or just screen directions and all in?
It's usually, well, when I'm just writing for myself, I almost always just do dialogue, because I have kind of a sense. I'll do very, very minor directions, but I don't usually do full panel descriptions if I'm the only one who's going to be looking at the script, because I kind of know what I want to do with that.
Right.
If it's something that I have to hand to an editor, like when I was working with the nib, I would have to do fairly detailed descriptions of like, and there will be a character on the left who will be facing right and will be saying stuff. That is, like I say, I mean, I can do all that, but it's just so much faster for me to scribble that out in kind of a throwaway drawing rather than do a giant block of text. And I think over time with the nib, like I did it maybe 5 pieces for them overall. And I mostly worked with Ellery Harris. I worked with Matt Bors once or twice. But as I got to work more and more with Ellery, and she got to know my process more and more, it's like, can I just send you the roughs and not have to bother with the whole typed script thing? And we kind of got to a point where that was workable. but yeah, that's usually like script, roughs, pencils, inks, color, and then lettering. The lettering I do digitally now. Back in the olden days, let me see. Actually, I have one right here. I have a comic, one of the comics that I cut up into individual panels here. This is a comic I did about 10 years ago. The shit I gotta come out about. Oh, like dating is a giant pain in the ass. So this is all hand lettering here. The whole comic is hand lettered. And me saying, "Hi, I'm gay." Someone off to the side. Well, this is gouache and marker, by the way. That's the color that I use there. And also, I'm trans. Oh, okay. Not really too surprising. And I'd say I range between 50% and 85% asexual, depending on, you know, stuff. Wait, what? What does that even mean? I own and listen to Toy Soldiers by Martika on purpose. Get out. So that's what my hand lettering looks like. And the reason I have moved away from hand lettering is, first of all, it's very, very hard on my hand. And I can, like, I know that there are people who live and die by hand lettering, and I understand and respect their position on that. If I did that, I would produce 25% of the pages that I can manage to produce, if that, because hand lettering causes so much distress to my hand that I would not be able to draw as much. So for something short like this is a one-page comic, and there's not a whole lot of text in there. It's not that big a deal to do that. But for something where I am, for example, this comic here, this is one of the ones that I did for the nib. You can see this is all digital lettering here. And part of the impetus there is that if I hand letter something and then the editor comes back and is like, we need to change the text on this, it is a nightmare to change that when you've hand lettered it. When you've digitally lettered it, it is so much easier to change. So all of this is like the balloons are digital, and the background of the text block is digital. The rest of the coloring on this is natural media. So this is like ink wash and pen, I think. But this is another short comic that I did for them. I can go ahead and read this one. Do a little comics reading here. Before I started hormones, using the women's room was fraught with peril. Lots of trans guys know this scenario. Mommy, there's a boy in the bathroom. What? Post-testosterone, I rarely have my right to use the men's room questioned, except for that one time at a leather bar. You can't pee in here unless it's on someone. So you can't go into the men's room to use the bathroom. You have to go to the women's room to use the bathroom. Rural gas stations are often cruising areas, which can make road trip pit stops awkward for scrutiny-avoiding trans guys. The guy over here using the urinal is pretending to piss. The stall door has been removed to discourage hookups. I am desperately longing for privacy, and there are graffiti with blowjob reviews on the wall of the stall. I kind of hate public toilets in general and would vastly prefer all-gender single occupancy potties everywhere. Such a relief. So this is an example of one where, because I was working with an editor and because it was very fast turnaround, like the nib, often you only had a couple of weeks to do the comic. So anything to cut down the time on the process would help. And if anything was going to come up of like, you've already finished the art, but we need to change something about the text, far, far easier to do that digitally. And frankly, my hand lettering is terrible. I find it very, like, I am not a patient letterer. I do not like to sit there and carefully make each letter form. So I tend to write it too fast and everything comes out a little messy and difficult to read. And then I end up having to do a lot of digital cleanup on it anyway. So I do find that the text, like the font lettering, is much more readable than my own hand lettering. And I apologize profusely to the people who are like, I don't like looking at digital lettering. And it's like, oh, well, that sucks for you, but I can't.
Okay, this is a cartoonist question. Which font are you using?
This one here is a Blambot font called Smack Attack. And that's the one I most often use for dialogue and word balloons and whatever. This one that's in the like the caption boxes where I want it to look a little bit different. I think that is called Mighty Zeo, but I don't actually remember off the top of my head what that one is called. But
you've got some nice fonts there. They're very readable.
Yeah, that's a very high priority for me, is like a font that is readable and that scales well. Because sometimes you'll find one that looks nice, but then you try to do something that is smaller text and it becomes unreadable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've got a whole bunch of Blambot fonts, and then at some point several years ago, I just went trolling online for like fonts that various people had made and put up for free.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a huge number of hand lettering fonts, and this is actually, that doesn't have the different ones in there. Well, I don't know. But like this one, I'll hold that up close. You can see there's that very thin, fine lettering up there. That's another one that I use a lot. I think it's called I actually don't remember but there are different fonts for evoking different feels, right? So if you want something that's got a fairly like I like the Smack Attack because I feel like it kind of fades into the background. Like it's not a font where you feel like you're looking at a font, you know? Something like the one that I used for the title here, you're looking at a font there. Like that feels like I am looking at some text. But that's for a title, so it's fine. But if it's something that you want to just you want the reader to have a comfortable experience reading it, I prefer something that is not very flashy and very like clean and readable. So yeah, that's kind of the stuff that I had picked out to show you. I don't know. I figured there would be a certain amount of Q&A here. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, or.
Let me really quickly say, one of our guests here, Rochelle Ann Medina, asked for some tips for young artists, and I don't know. I suggested to her that she might also take a look at our Thursday meeting, which is much more informal. But if you have some tips for young artists, I'm sure we'd all love to hear them.
As far as like getting your stuff out there, or
this is Rochelle. She's probably, I don't know if she'll answer in the text or if she'll take if she'll unmute. But she had asked that question about young artists. I'm not quite sure what level of depth she needs there. She can probably put that in the chat though. Keep an eye on that.
I don't know where the chat window is.
It's down below. It says where it says participants chat share screen. It's down below with your share area.
I'm getting a different. Ooh. Oh, there it is. I found it.
Yeah.
Okay. I see it now.
Yeah, she left a question.
Oh, okay. Okay. Excellent. So I guess I'm interpreting young artist to mean like you're starting out, you're maybe trying to get your system together and maybe get published, and the publishing industry is just constantly changing, and the advice that you would give someone from 5 years ago is different from the advice you would give someone 10 years ago versus 20 years ago. And I don't know, like it changes so much so fast that it is hard to even know, like, the ways that I have gotten jobs in the past may or may not actually work anymore. A lot of the work that I have gotten has been because somebody that I know knew somebody who, like, knew an editor who was like, we're looking for someone to do a comic about trans stuff. And they'd be like, oh, you should reach out to Dylan. So, like, I started working with the Nib because I had previously worked with Jen Sorensen, who is an editorial cartoonist. And she had been at the time an editor at Fusion. And then I heard about her, or like I got in touch with her because my friend Melanie Gilman had, like, Jen had asked them for, like, do you have recommendations for trans cartoonists to reach out to? And then I knew Melanie because when I moved to Denver, I found one of their comics in a paper and was like, hey, I'm also a queer cartoonist. We should hang out. So it's like this cascade of things that, you know, there's no way to predict that I emailed someone because I saw their comic in a local paper and then that led 10 years later to me working for the Nib. It's just like,
Okay.
you know, things just sort of like, it's the networking thing. And like networking, I know there was someone who did a big post about this recently, and I agree with it 100%. Like, networking is not going up to people and saying, hey, give me a job. You know, networking is, especially for a young artist, hang out with other young artists or older artists or whoever, you know, just hang out, be friends with them.
I want to hang out with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't treat people like they're the gateway for your career, because people really hate it when you do that. Like, if someone comes, this is why I don't like doing shows in LA, actually, is because when every time I'm doing a show in LA, people come up to the table and you think, oh, this person's coming up to talk to me about my art. And what they're actually doing is coming up to be like, hey, would you like to help me promote my stuff? And it's like, I don't know you and I don't care about you. So no, I don't want to help you promote your stuff. But having, like, introducing yourself to someone as being like, what can you do for me, is not a great introduction. But introducing yourself to someone is like I did with Melanie, is like, hey, I'm another queer cartoonist. I just moved to town. I saw your work in the local paper. Do you want to hang out sometime? Do you want to get together and draw? And like, they were like, oh yeah, we should do that. And that kind of a thing. Like, I didn't hang out with Melanie because I thought Melanie would help my career. I hung out with Melanie because they're a fun person. And we had.
Can I interject here that
Yeah.
is exactly the advice I gave Rochelle, which is check out our Thursday meeting, because there's lots of professional and amateur and just friends of artists. And we have a long history and know a lot of people, and you never know, sharing your work. And it's a share your work too on Thursday. So bring it in, let people see it, have fun, and be honest about enjoying their work and having them enjoy your work. And you're always welcome at these meetings.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like that's basically like, just be friends with other cartoonists. And like, yeah, so much of the work that I have gotten has come from someone I know talking to someone else, you know, and being like, oh, reach out to this person. Like the No Straight Lines documentary that was on PBS earlier this year that you know, focused on Alison Bechtel and Jennifer Camper, and Howard Cruz, Rupert Kennard, and Mary Wings. That was put together by Justin Hall, and I know Justin Hall. He didn't do the documentary. He worked with a documentary filmmaker, but like Justin Hall, I met at San Diego Comic-Con one year because we were both tabling at the Prism Comics booth. And like, we just hung out and we happened to get along. And then down the road, Justin Hall is like, oh, we should interview you for this documentary that we're doing. And, you know, that kind of thing. Like, it's very organic. You never quite know where some connection is going to come from, but just like maintaining relationships with other cartoonists and hanging out and like, and interacting with people. I find like, I'm personally, I'm trying to get better about this, but like, you know, when your friends post their comics on Instagram or Tumblr or Facebook or wherever people are posting stuff, like it and comment on it
Mhm.
to improve the visibility and to let them know that you enjoyed the work. It can be very draining to put stuff up there and nobody interacts at all. You know, and feel comfortable asking people for feedback if you want to. I don't tend to a whole lot because often I'm working with an editor anyway, so I don't necessarily need anyone besides the editor to add input to my stuff. But there have been some things where I'm like, you know, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, oh, maybe try having it be this way instead of that way. And then just, you know, and do that for other people and just enjoy creating together, and then stuff will happen. As far as working professionally goes, the biggest piece of advice that I have is be nice to work with and hit your deadlines. That honestly matters more than your technical skill. I mean, technical skill is important, and you are going to get jobs because someone saw your art and liked it. But if you are the most brilliant artist of all time and your pages are gorgeous, but you cannot hit a deadline to save your life, people are going to stop working with you. Or if you are grumpy and unpleasant to work with, people are going to stop working with you. So be as easy to work with as you can. I've worked with a lot of different editors, and sometimes I don't like the feedback they give me, but the way that I handle that is not to be like, how dare you insult my amazing work? It's to be like, well, let me explain a little better about why I made the choice that I made. And like 90% of the edits I get on my comics, I just accept them because I figure either it doesn't make that much of a difference to me or it does actually improve the work. I only push back on the things where I'm like, I really think that the thing that I did originally is the thing that works the best. And here's why I think that, and then have a, you know, like a productive discussion with the editor about that. And oftentimes the editor will be like, you know what, you're right, that's fine. Or I understand where you're coming from, and here's how I would compromise on that, or whatever. And hit your deadlines. And the thing about hitting deadlines is that very often, unless you're working, like I said, the turnaround time was very, very short. So you didn't really have a whole lot of leeway to ask for extensions because they were like, we need the finals by this date. And because it was often very topical, and the longer you wait, it goes stale, and then it's not gonna land the way they want. So they don't want to pay you for something that is going to be out of date by the time it goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But with a lot of other projects, you will have a certain amount of leeway. Like usually when they're coming up with the production schedule, they will propose the production schedule based on their idea of how long it's going to take, but they've always hopefully built in a certain amount of padding into that. So with a lot of things I've done, I'll be like, either I'll look at the production schedule up front and be like, this is going to be too tight to do these things. Can we space that out a little bit more to give me more time to do this? Or if it's getting down to the wire, rather than ghosting your editor and just being like, I'm just going to wait until they yell at me for not having turned things in on time, proactively say, hey, I'm going to blow the deadline. I'm sorry about that. Can I have an extension? I think I will need this much more time to do it.
Can I say something who's been
Yeah.
both a publisher and people working with publishers? There is the actual deadline, and then there's the fake deadline. You
Yep.
give the artist the fake deadline, which is much sooner than the actual deadline,
Yep.
because that gives them the leeway.
Because you know it's going to happen anyway, and so it's baked in there. And and even if you as an artist know that, still try to hit the original deadline. Like my deadline for this magazine is they really want it turned in by the 1st of the month, so that they have time to do the layout and everything. I usually try to get it in a few days before that, but I also know that the 1st is not the drop deadline. That's the please have it in by this date. But the 5th is more like the drop deadline. So if I'm absolutely hosed that month and I don't get it in by the 1st, I would just be like, hey, I'm really sorry. It's going to be a little bit late, but I swear I will have it to you by the 5th. So as much as
Publishers are
possible.
like creditors. They just want you to pay a little bit at a time if you can.
Uh-huh.
Never ghost them.
Communicate is really the big thing. Like, just tell them they will not love the fact that you were going to blow your deadline, but they would rather know that up front and be able to accommodate that rather than being like having to chase you down. Anytime you make an editor write another email that they didn't have to write, they are going to resent it. So yeah, I mean, absolutely technical skill is important, but to be a working cartoonist, you have to be someone who can work with other people. And that is going to be, as far as getting, like, you know, if you're doing a self-published comic, you can do whatever you want. But if you're going to be working with people and getting paid by them, they're not going to want to give you money if you're a pain in the butt to work with. And I do know quite a few people who do anthologies and who are editors for that. And when they encounter a problem cartoonist, they keep a list of who those people are. And when their friend is like, hey, I'm about to put together an anthology, can I see your list? And they'll be like, yes, here are the people that you want to think very, very carefully about before you work with them, because they are going to be a nightmare. Or here is someone who got a rejection notice and then sent the editor an abusive email screaming at them for how dare you reject me, I'm a genius. And it's like, oh, well, great, since you screamed at me and insulted me, I can't wait to work with you. So you're going to get rejected. It's going to happen. Like I said, I've worked with the Nibs several times. I had several of my pitches rejected too. And like the very first thing I pitched them was rejected. The second thing I pitched them was accepted. If I had reacted to that first rejection with, how dare you, I'm a genius and you should have published me, I never would have worked with them. But when they rejected that first pitch, they were like, you know what, this isn't going to work for us, but feel free to pitch again. I'm like, okay, I'll pitch something else. Later on, found out the thing I had pitched them was very similar to a comic that was already in production with them. So they didn't even reject it because it was a bad idea or because they didn't like it. It was because it was too similar to a thing that they already had going. But because of non-disclosure agreements, they couldn't say, hey, we've already got a comic in the pipeline that's very similar to the thing you pitched. So that's just a thing to be aware of, that a rejection may not even have anything to do with the quality of your work. There are 9 million different reasons why you can get rejected. Be
Dylan, that
sanguine
was
about it. Just roll
amazing
with it.
talk on publishing.
So yeah, and longevity in any art is going to be about, can you keep doing it over time? And if you burn yourself out by getting, you know, overly emotionally invested in every single rejection or whatever, then it's not going to happen. So you'd move on to the next thing, you know, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's kind of, and like, that's about how to deal with being in publishing, as far as like, if you're a young artist who is just kind of starting out with your artwork, experiment a lot. Like, you are going to be developing your style, and the things that might seem like they're going to be I don't know, you just start drawing stuff, and maybe the stuff that you start drawing when you're first drawing is like, it doesn't work for you. I had to change my style several times due to physical injury. Like, I used to do cross-hatching on my very first comics that I did, and as I was saying before, why I don't do hand lettering anymore, same reason I don't do cross-hatching is like, that is very, very, very hard on my hand. That's when I switched to doing marker and ink wash, because that is a much softer touch, and it's actually faster than cross-hatching as well. So some of my development of my style was just me deciding which things I found more enjoyable to draw, and some of the things were like, this is causing me pain and suffering, and I can't do it. I stopped doing cross-hatching when I was like in my 20s, you know, that's how quickly that hurt my hand. So that too, like, think about how, like, the younger you are, the more you can tolerate that kind of like physical taxing. But as you get older, it's going to catch up to you. So as much as it is difficult to do when you're not in pain, figure out a good setup and a good like maintenance level of workflow. Because I have been in physical therapy many times because my shoulders get very tight and tensed up, and then that causes a cascade of problems. I've literally had my arms stop working because the blood flow got cut off by my and like the nerves got pinched by my shoulders getting too tight. So if you're hunched over like this and you're just drawing and drawing for hours and hours and hours, when you're 23, that may be fine. When you're 43, that's going to be like, oh no, I can't move anymore. So I do physical therapy exercises every single day. I get up and take stretch breaks all the time. And it's easier to do that if you're already in the habit. So especially young artists, please, please, please have good ergonomics, take stretch breaks, get in the habit of it now, and hopefully save yourself having to spend a lot of time in physical therapy like me. So that's kind of what I got on that. And we got another, the two men in the bathroom talking to one another. I'm not sure what that
Is that quite?
I
I was reading the chat. But yeah, so do we have other questions or comments or things?
All I know is if you get a chance to read Dylan's work, do it, because he always gives that last minute twist, and it's just people trying to exist. And there's an awful lot of wonderful humor in his work. So definitely look it up.
Yeah, I think I know I had sent y'all the like my web address. I still have a website. I still maintain a website. I know that is a thing that not many people do anymore because nobody goes to websites anymore. But the fact of the matter is, every few years there's a turnover in social media. So 10 years ago, posting to Tumblr was the thing. And then 5 years ago, posting to Instagram was the thing. And then everything changes about the algorithms or the websites or whatever, and then they crater and you lose. Like people, I know a lot of people who would get a lot of traffic off of Twitter, and now Twitter is cratering. And so when you have put everything into like if you invest too much in a particular social media website as the basis of where all your work lives, that is going to get yanked out from underneath you at some point. So I've had a website, I've had the same website for 23 years, and I continue to update it, even though my web traffic is nothing like it was because everyone is reading comics on social media. But, you know, when Instagram goes away, or when Tumblr goes away, or when Facebook goes away, my website is still there, and I've still been able to point people to the same place the entire time for the last 23 years. So
did you type in your website here?
no, I can do that though.
Yeah, type it in real quick. Somebody,
Okay.
It's probably on DylanEdwards.com, but we're gonna make sure.
It's actually studiondr.com. Ender was my nickname. Is that actually an active link, or do I think I have to type in all of the other stuff?
Let's see. Let me just see if that's working. I always do a quick check.
There, that's an actual active link there. I think the other thing is just.
Okay, what do we got? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. That Ender was my pen name when I first started out. And then I found that I didn't actually like using a pen name. And I was worried that I'd already done some comics, and so I would be stuck with the pen name forever. And that's not really the case. Like, if you want to change your name on your comics, you can change your name on your comics. I think it matters somewhat less than people would assume, especially if you're posting online and people are just kind of, they're reading it off of whatever your social media is anyway. But like trans people change their names all the time, and there are quite a few trans cartoonists who had it one name when they started their careers and have shifted to a different name.
Well, that makes.
And so, yeah, you have to be prepared to change. But you know, like it is helpful to have something that's easy to remember. People are overwhelmed with information now, and they are the way that people tend to behave when they get an influx of information and they can't parse it all is they just ignore the stuff they don't understand. So I would strongly recommend having something very simple and that communicates very clearly what you're doing, because no one's really going to sit there and be like, you know what, I've got a whole lot of time to waste and I'm just going to sit there and Google. Yeah, yes. So
Well, make if I could interject, make looking for you easy.
yeah,
And I know people, if you are not going to change your name, this is easier. So, you know, it's like I'm donabar.com.
yeah.
And at donabar.com, there are many links. It's a blog spot, is what it is, and I just redirect with GoDaddy, which GoDaddy originally was they'll let anybody post anything except if the guy finally had to take a stand and said, "Okay, enough with the right wing assholes," and he finally did. He was so I don't let anybody post anything. Oh, but not that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and Donna,
anyway, but it redirects to donabar.com, and then on that there are link after link after link that I can change or leave in place to store. So your website should be easy to find and easy to navigate, and then you can get crazy all over the place. You can say,
yeah,
this is my Instagram, this is my Facebook, this is whatever. But like Dylan is pointing out, that website is that docking port that everybody can find you at and make it easy.
there's also the issue that as if you do anything that could be even vaguely considered adult work, a lot of like there are various laws that have made it. That's just why Tumblr ended up cratering itself. Is they were like they had been a host of adult content for quite some time, and they decided to purge all of it because of the Sesta Fosta law that was like that made the web host responsible for the content that the individuals were posting. So if someone put up something there that violated the law, Tumblr was the one who was going to get into trouble over it. So they're like, we'll just get rid of all the adult content. And that's why so many people were going to Tumblr in the first place. So their user base cratered after they did that. But that's another thing that you won't have control over when a social media site is like, we have changed our terms of service and we will no longer host the content that you have put on here and that you have built your audience from. And
could I just say also, because of AI and adult content and all these other problems, that we have zine fests,
yes,
paper zine fests popping up all over the place, including the Bremerton Zine Fest. They're coming back.
Yep, I've done multiple zine fests this year, and I do think that there is an increased interest in that kind of like small production media, because as people just get bombarded with mainstream media that gets more and more and more the same over time, they get bored. They want something new and different, and anything that is like too censored or trying too hard to fit the most innocuous model possible, you know, that's what Disney is going to put out for you. And they'll be like, we put a queer character in here. If you blinked, you missed them. But like zine fests are, if you want to find queer content, zine fests are where it's at. Like I would say oftentimes at a zine fest, a good 25 to 50% of the people tabling there are some flavor of queer. So that's
also someplace like the Bremerton Zine Fest. They got the mayor on board. They got the Poets Society on board. And we're talking real poets, you know, doing gritty stuff. We got they got the whole town. It's Bremerton, for God's sakes, the old port. They got everybody on board. They got hotels that want them to have their convention there instead of the middle of the park at 96 degrees, because everybody wants, you know, paper they can get their hands on now. And I don't know if they think it's new or different, or just the fact that nobody can control it.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, it's amazing. Bremerton is just rolling like crazy. So is SquashCon PA up in Port Angeles. So wherever you are, look around locally, you will find these places.
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, I don't know. Any other questions or comments? I see Roberta there. Another person
away at her new place.
Yeah.
Are you at the new place?
Oh yeah.
Nice and a nice place you got there. I don't know. I'm trying to think of. We have a lot of professional people on here, and I just enjoy seeing your work. And now that I've got your website page,
Yeah,
I'm gonna go back and look at that a lot more. I've always enjoyed your stories and your tongue in cheek. And you're the one that did Max and Lily.
No, that's Chris Dresden.
Oh, okay. You can see what I mean. It's like they're kind of, they're not the same work, but they're in the same stable. The same kind of tongue in cheek. Not the same. And also earlier work, styles have really become very, very, very pinpointed and personalized over the years.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you've sent off copies of what you've got to San Diego Special Collections, which is where your stuff went, so you're up there in special collections, you lose track of who did what.
Yeah. And well, like, let me go grab this actually. This is this volume here, and I don't actually know if I put I didn't put that in my but this is the No Straight Lines anthology that Justin Hall put together through Fantagraphics like 10 years ago. But this is, he basically went through and got 40 years worth of queer comics in this book. And so there's a huge range of styles and topics and everything. And like I said before, queer history tends to kind of vanish. And so this is a really great book, not just from the perspective of, you know, the comics that are in it, which are, I have some comics in there too, but you know, it's like, it's just it's a great overview of like tons and tons of different queer cartoonists for across many decades.
Oh, can
Also,
I really quickly, Dylan? Can I ask you if you're going to share on screen instead of your share screen, we can see the stuff you're sharing live better if you close your share screen.
If I close it, okay.
Yeah, if you close it, because then we can see what you're holding up to our screen.
Okay.
It makes it bigger.
Okay.
There we go. See, now we can see it bigger. We can see it in more detail.
Yeah. Okay. It looks different on my screen, I think, but with the Max and Lily that you were talking about, and some of my work from 20 years ago, like oftentimes that's referencing like contemporary queer stuff that's going on, or like Dykes to Watch Out For. A huge amount of Dykes to Watch Out For was about what was actually happening in the world at that time. And it's easier, in some ways it's easier to kind of absorb that material through comics, because it's often being presented like you're talking about these complex topics that have been distilled into a comic that is kind of like, can tell that story very succinctly and in a way that kind of humanizes it. I enjoy collecting old comics. I have a bunch of like panel cartoons from like Life magazine and Punch from the 1850s to the 1950s. And what's fascinating about those is, again, you're looking at comics that are speaking to a contemporary audience, but the comic at this point is 100 years old. And one of the ones that is one of my favorites is from the 1890s. And it's got like, this was not just this one comic. There was a whole series of like, this was a topic of the day of like women were wearing pants. And that meant that they were going to grow huge and buff and masculine, and men were going to get tiny and skinny and small, and they were going to be dominated by these women because the women were wearing pants. And this was a genuine fear that was happening at the time. And there were, like I said, there were multiple comics that are showing a gigantic hulking beefcake of a woman and her teeny tiny frail effeminate husband. And it's like, that was part of the cultural zeitgeist for the 1890s, that no one was explaining what was happening there. Like we know now, okay, it's like you have some misogyny problems there, maybe a little bit. Like women wearing pants is not going to cause women to suddenly grow massive muscles.
Yeah.
But, you know, but that kind of cultural thing is very easy to find in comics and very easy to distill in comics. And then you can look back at these things from decades and decades and decades ago and be like, oh, this is what they were concerned about. There's another one from the 1920s where, you know, when androgyny was a fairly popular fashion choice. And there's a comic from the 1920s that has a young man and a woman walking down the street together, and they are dressed identical except for the fact that the young woman has earrings. But other than that, they've got like kind of these like tank tops and shorts and short hair. And the comic in the 1920s is freaking out about the idea of androgyny. It's like, you can't tell them apart. Oh my God. And it's fascinating that 100 years later, people are now freaking out over the idea that these people, and you can't tell what gender they are, and you have to be able to tell what gender somebody is. Oh my God, what would society will crumble if we can't tell. It's like the same neuroses that are afflicting people in power. So
I have to ask you, because Roberta would probably tell you, as I'm always on this hobby horse. Have you willed your collection to anybody?
I have not. I haven't really thought about that.
San Diego State University has special collections, and there's also a collection at Ohio State University, which is my alma mater. And either one of them, I'm sure, would love to have that collection in their collection.
Yeah.
And I have contacts for the San Diego one.
Okay.
So, I mean, you know, where is it going to go if you have these marvelous things? Having a contact so it can be sent there, you know, if you need to, or if you're done with it, it then can be in a climate controlled, safe area at a university out of a tsunami zone.
Yeah. Good point.
I'm always on the troll for those guys.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. All right. Well, I don't know. I feel like we're kind of like, it's almost 8 o'clock here. I don't know what time you usually run to, but
this would be 5:30 to 6:30, but it was so interesting.
Oh, okay. So we've actually run over.
I would very much like to invite you to our drink and draw. Get the link up there. Make sure you get the links, because those are a lot of fun, and we just drink and draw.
What days do you usually do those?
It's every Thursday.
Every
Thursday, 6:30 for us, 7:30 for you. Lots of fun.
Did you say the fourth Thursday?
Yes.
Well, yeah, every fourth Thursday, and I could make sure you got the link too. I think the link was on the messages we sent you.
You may.
But those are a blast, and this one is the Halloween party, so we wouldn't take it amiss if you showed up.
I won't be able to do it this Thursday. I have a friend coming in from out of town, and we're going to go run around and do Halloween stuff. But it is definitely a thing that I may want to pop into in the future, especially as we get further into winter here, and it is very snowy, and I do not wish to leave the house.
Well, while you're running around town, there's no reason you can't take your phone and say, "Hi, folks, look where we are." Don't you wish you were here?
Indeed. All right. Well, it was a lot of fun talking to you, and I should let you go, and I should go eat my dinner.
I gotta go feed a husband and some cats.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, anyway, thanks again, Dylan. And with that, thank you everybody for attending, and hopefully we will see you all at the drink and draw. And if not, everybody
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
Happy
Happy
Halloween.
Halloween. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye
Goodbye.
bye.